A tall, heavy-set man with bushy brown hair walked outside of his Midtown Manhattan architectural office, holding an empty pizza box in his hand. Rex Heuermann of Massapequa Park, New York, was completely unaware that his every move was being closely monitored by a police surveillance team. Once police recovered the discarded pizza box, DNA retrieved from inside would lead to the arrest of a man that authorities now believe to be responsible for the brutal torture and murder of at least 6 young women, and possibly more, putting an end to the hunt for a man that had evaded capture for over 30 years and haunted the Long Island community as the notorious Gilgo Beach Killer. Join me for this very special episode of Courtroom Confidential Case Notes. Ironically, the discovery that a serial killer had been hunting sex workers in Suffolk County came after the disappearance of a young woman who police now believe had no connection to the man who would become known as the Gilgo Beach Killer. Shannan Gilbert disappeared on May 1st, 2010, after visiting a client she met on Craigslist in the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island, New York. The night she vanished, she made a haunting call to 911.
State Police.
Yeah, there's somebody after me.
I'm sorry?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Okay, where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you, ma'am?
I don't know.
Gilbert, age 23, ran to an elderly neighbor's house, knocked on the door, and asked for help before tumbling down the stairs and darting off. The elderly neighbor called 911, as did another neighbor who told police she was afraid to let Gilbert into her home.
Suffolk Police 875. What is the location of your emergency?
43 the Bayou. Some woman is knocking at my door.
What town are you in?
Oak Beach Association.
What's the nearest corner street now?
Ocean Parkway. She says she's in danger.
Do you know her or no?
No, I don't. I'm not letting her in.
But when police finally dispatched officers, Gilbert was nowhere to be found. A month after her disappearance, the Suffolk County Police Department's Missing Persons Bureau asked Officer John Malia to search for Gilbert with his trained cadaver dog, a German Shepherd named Blue. Over the course of the summer of 2010, Malia unsuccessfully searched the gated beach community where Gilbert had last been seen. Malia made a new attempt at a search on December 11th, 2010, staying close to the shoulder of the parkway. The officer based his search of the area on FBI data indicating that dumped bodies are frequently found close to roadways. Despite thick vegetation and a light layer of snow, Malia's cadaver dog alerted to a scent, which the pair tracked to a skeleton wrapped in disintegrated burlap. The remains were later identified as Melissa Bartholomew. A large-scale search eventually discovered 3 additional bodies while searching the scene for further evidence. The bodies of the 4 victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, were found approximately 500 feet from each other and will later be dubbed the Gilgo Beach 4. There was no question to authorities; they now had a serial killer on their hands. The story of the Gilgo Beach Killer is very long and it's very detailed, and we are going to try to do our best here in this episode to cover as much of that detail as possible. I know we're going to miss some things, and I know there's some areas that we're just not going to be able to spend as much time as we would like to. But this story actually begins over 15 years before the discovery of these 4 women who have now become known as the Gilgo Beach 4. Let's go through that timeline now. Back in November 20th of 1993, 2 hunters in a wooded area of Southampton discovered the remains of Sandra Castilla, 28 years old. She was lying on her back with her arms outstretched over her head, and her uncovered legs were spread apart. Her shirt had been pulled up over her head, and she had numerous stab wounds to her face, torso, breasts, legs, and vaginal area. Castilla was a native of Trinidad and Tobago, living in New York at the time. Skip forward 10 years later to July 21st, 2003. Jessica Taylor goes missing. Taylor is known to streetwalk as a sex worker in Midtown Manhattan. This was during the time that Rex Heuermann worked in the same vicinity as Jessica was known to work. In fact, Heuermann can be traced to be in Manhattan the very same day she was last heard from. A witness described a dark-colored Chevy pickup being in the vicinity where Taylor's remains were eventually discovered. We're going to find out later on how important that vehicle is. A few days later, on July 26, 2003, an individual walking their dog in Manorville discovers the partial remains of Jessica Taylor. She's lying on her back with her legs bent underneath her. She has been decapitated, with both arms severed from her body below the elbows. A tattoo on her torso has been severely obliterated with a sharp object, and her remains would not be identified until 2011, when her skull and arms are eventually discovered. Moving on a few years later to July 9th, 2007, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, age 25, is seen for the last time. She was living in Connecticut and working as a sex worker. She would often travel to Manhattan to visit clients, as she was the week she went missing. She was contacted by a burner phone shortly before her disappearance. This idea of a burner phone is going to become very important, we will find. A burner phone is a phone where an individual is able to purchase a phone, sometimes using cash, likely not using their correct name, and it already has minutes on it, basically making the phone untraceable to the individual who's using the phone, yet the number is still able to be traced, and the location of the phone is oftentimes able to be traced. Moving on to July 10th of 2009, Melissa Bartholomew, 24, of the Bronx, disappears. She was working as a sex worker as well. The night she disappeared, she told a friend she was visiting a client. She was also contacted by a burner phone the last day she was seen alive. The burner phone was tracked from Massapequa Park to Midtown Manhattan on the day of her disappearance. After her disappearance, her family receives several phone calls from her cell phone while the phone was located in Midtown Manhattan. The male caller taunts her family, admitting to killing and sexually assaulting Melissa. June 6, 2010, Megan Waterman, age 22, from Maine, is seen alive for the last time at the Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, New York. She was a sex worker and had a 3-year-old daughter. She too was contacted by a burner phone the day of her disappearance. Megan's phone was last tracked from the hotel to Massapequa Park. Now we're at September 2nd, 2010. Amber Costello, 27, disappears. She lived in West Babylon, New York. She was last seen leaving her residence late at night to meet a client. The day prior to her disappearance, a client came to Amber's home. He was described as a large, white male, mid-40s, with dark, bushy hair, a description consistent with Rex Heuermann. During the visit, Amber performed a ruse on the man whereby a person pretending to be an outraged boyfriend entered her home and the client left the residence. Amber kept his money. At that time, a witness noticed a Chevrolet Avalanche parked in Amber's driveway. This one piece of evidence would later become the biggest break in the case. The next day, the same client texted Amber from a burner phone asking to meet again. The burner phone was traced traveling to Amber's residence. Amber then left her own cell phone behind, walked out the front door of her home, and was never heard from again. December 11th, 2010. The officer we heard about earlier was conducting a training exercise and also a search with his canine along Gilgo Beach. He discovers the skeletonized remains of Melissa Bartholomew. She was wrapped in burlap in thick brush. This discovery starts a much larger search. 2 days later, on December 13th, 2010, Suffolk County Police Department continued to search in the proximity and discovered the remains of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. Similarities linked these victims together. They were all found within close proximity of each other. They were all petite females, approximately 22 to 27 years old in age. They were all sex workers. They were all missing clothing and personal possessions. They had been contacted by burner phones shortly before their murders, and they were bound in a similar fashion with either belts or tape, and 3 were wrapped in burlap-like material. March 29th, 2011. Jessica Taylor's skull, hands, and forearm are discovered just east of Gilgo Beach, 8 years after the discovery of her decapitated body. The same side of the road where Brainerd Barnes, Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello's bodies had been discovered. Now we skip forward 11 years later to January of 2022. In the meantime, there are no leads. There are no breaks in the case. There are no suspects, and the community has become frustrated. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office creates a task force to conduct a comprehensive review of evidence in the investigation. On March 14th, 2022, Rex Heuermann becomes a suspect for the very first time in the investigation. Let's talk a little bit about who Rex Heuermann is. Well, at the time, he's a 59-year-old Nassau County resident. Heuermann lived much of his life in Massapequa Park on the south shore of Long Island. A high school classmate described him as quiet, kept to himself, and extremely intelligent. He worked in Manhattan as an architect since 1987 and ran a company called RH Consultants and Associates, boasting clients that included Target, Foot Locker, Catholic Charities, and American Airlines. Standing at 6 foot 4 inches and weighing 240 pounds, Heuermann was described as imposing and very strong. Yet neighbors still describe Heuermann as a regular guy who goes to work, has kids in local school, and was always well dressed. One thing that did stand out was the disrepair of his home. His house stood out in the neighborhood for having overgrown shrubs and debris. One neighbor said it was weird. He looked like a businessman, but his house was a dump. On this pivotal date of March 14th, 2022, 12 years after the disappearance of Amber Costello, the task force discovers that Heuermann owned a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche during the time of Amber's disappearance. Heuermann also matched the description of the client that was last believed to be with Amber before she was murdered. This discovery led to a comprehensive investigation of Heuermann, which consisted of over 300 subpoenas, search warrants, and other investigative tools used to obtain evidence, eventually linking Heuermann to the murders. This evidence included, amongst other things, cell phone billing and cell site locations, burner phones that he used to arrange meetings and make taunting phone calls. Heuermann lived in Massapequa Park, where the victims were believed to have disappeared from, and Heuermann worked in Midtown Manhattan, where the taunting calls were made from. By July 13th, 2023, Suffolk County Police arrest Heuermann that evening. July 14th, 2023, a grand jury indicts Heuermann for the murders of Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello. By January 16th of 2024, Heuermann is charged with the murder of Brainerd Barnes. And most recently, June 6, 2024, Heuermann is charged with the murders of Taylor and Castilla. One of the more remarkable aspects of this case is the thoroughness and the diligence of the investigation. Reading through the reports that we have and the documents filed in court is some of the more detailed investigation and reporting that I have ever read. Not only did they take the time to determine that Heuermann was their likely suspect, but they took the time to foreclose any possibilities that Heuermann could present a defense or alibi on his own behalf. It's really remarkable, and we're going to get into some of the highlights of that now. First, starting with the DNA. There were female hairs recovered at several of the crime scenes. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was left restrained by 3 leather belts, and a female hair was recovered from a buckle of one of those belts. Megan Waterman had been restrained with clear tape. 2 female hairs were recovered from that tape. Amber Costello was also bound by clear tape. A female hair was also recovered from that tape. In July of 2022, undercover detectives recovered trash from the receptacle outside of Heuermann's home. By February and March of 2023, a laboratory determined that the female hairs recovered from the victims, could be matched to Heuermann's wife. Male hairs were also recovered. Megan Waterman had also been wrapped in burlap. A single male hair was recovered from the bottom of that burlap. During the examination of Jessica Taylor's body, a single male hair was recovered from a surgical drape that had been underneath her body. A single male hair was also recovered from the shirt above Sandra Castilla's head. In January of 2023, a surveillance team observed Heuermann discard a pizza box into a garbage can outside of his Manhattan office. By June of 2023, swabs taken from that pizza box were matched to the male hair recovered from Waterman. A year later, in March of 2024, after Heuermann has been arrested for the murders of Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello, a buccal swab, this is where police swab the inside of a person's cheek, of Rex Heuermann, was determined to be a significant match to the hairs recovered from Taylor's body and Castilla's shirt. Other parts of the investigation are no less detailed and no less remarkable. Rex Heuermann's wife was determined to be out of the state of New York during the disappearance of Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and Jessica Taylor, and no one was living with Heuermann during the time of Sandra Castilla's disappearance. Billing records showed numerous instances where Heuermann's personal phone was in the same general location as the burner phones used to contact Bartholomew, Waterman, and Costello. Significantly, investigators could find no instance where Heuermann was in a separate location from the burner phones or when the victims' phones were used after their suspected murders. Investigators also located a number of online accounts under fictitious names that were linked to Heuermann for use in illicit activities. Burner phones and phony email accounts were used for prostitution-related contacts. These phones also had frequent contact with cell sites in Massapequa Park and Midtown Manhattan. Google search history also revealed thousands of searches related to sex workers and torture-related pornography. Even the searches on the list are too graphic to tell here on this episode, but I will tell you that they are highly disturbing and not ambiguous at all. The search history also included over 200 searches for known serial killers and the specific disappearances of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. The fictitious email accounts also contained selfie photographs of Rex Heuermann. And when Heuermann was arrested, the burner phone linked to the fictitious email account was found on his person. There's also been newly discovered digital evidence, and what's remarkable about this is everything that we've discussed before now is certainly enough evidence to put Heuermann away for the rest of his life, but the investigators have never really considered this investigation to be over, and they continue to look, they continue to conduct search warrants, and they have found remarkably valuable evidence, as we'll get into now. Following Heuermann's arrest, numerous search warrants were conducted on his residence, which culminated in over 350 electronic devices being recovered. An analysis of these devices revealed that Heuermann had a significant collection of violent bondage and torture pornography dating back to 1994, including mutilation, bondage, and other graphic images which largely coincide to the condition in which many of the victims were discovered. Moreover, during the analysis of a hard drive recovered from Heuermann's basement, a document entitled HK 2002-04 was discovered in the unallocated space on the hard drive. When a user deletes data, many users believe that the file has been purged forever. However, deleting a file only tells the computer that the space previously occupied by that file is now available. The deleted data will remain in, quote, unallocated space until another file is written over it. Data contained within unallocated space can be retrieved via a computer forensic extraction method called file carving. The HK 2002-04 document is believed to be a planning document utilized by Heuermann to methodically blueprint and plan out his kills. The document contains 4 categories. The first, entitled quote-unquote problems, appears to be a guide on how to avoid apprehension. The second, titled supplies, which is clearly supplies needed to carry out his serial murders. The third, simply DS, is believed to be dump site research. And the last, TRG, or target, appears to be about the victims he was looking to hunt. The document also contains 3 other categories. The first, called pre-prep, appears to be a guide on steps to take in advance of a murder, including things such as inspecting his vehicle, engaging the target, conducting quote-unquote recon, checking for surveillance cameras, and even checking the weather. The second in this section, prep, are steps taken closer in time to the murder, setting up a quote-unquote staging area, a holding area, and building even a table. And the third, entitled post-event, appears to be a checklist of tasks following a murder to avoid apprehension. Things like destroy files, change tires, burn gloves, dispose of pics, and have a story set. Further on in the document includes categories such as recon reports, takedown/pick up, which includes things such as remember, don't charge gas. A grim section entitled body prep has such reminders as wash body, remove trace DNA, remove ID marks such as tattoos, remove head and hands, package for transport. Another section, dispose of following: tools and devices, clothes and personal items, props, toys, wooden items, what you wore, computer files, burn gloves. There's a section entitled Things to Remember, saying get sleep before hunt, too tired creates problems. Hit harder, hit to the face or next time for takedown. Use heavy rope for neck. Light rope broke under stress of being tightened. And finally, there's a notes section, which has specific page references to a book entitled Mindhunter by John Douglas, concerning the criminal profiling of serial killers. It's obvious that authorities are continuing to investigate this case and shown a willingness to add charges where they feel that they have enough evidence to implicate Heuermann on other victims. And there are other suspected victims. There were other bodies found in that area, and we can touch on some of those now. One prominent name amongst the bodies that have been discovered has been a woman by the name of Valerie Mack. Mack was 24 and living in Philadelphia and working as an escort when she went missing in 2000. Her partial remains were discovered in Manorville on November 19, 2000, but remained unidentified until 2020. Her torso was also wrapped in garbage bags and dumped in a wooded area in close proximity to where the other victims had been dumped. Her body had also been mutilated similar to the other victims. Her head and hands had been removed and were not discovered until 11 years later. Another woman, described as the Fire Island Jane Doe, was later identified as Karen Vergata, 34, from Manhattan, who was believed to be working as a sex worker when she vanished in 1996. Her severed legs were found in a garbage bag on Fire Island in 1996. 15 years later, her skull was discovered in Tobay Beach in Nassau County. There are also unidentified remains. In 1997, the dismembered torso of an unidentified woman was found on Hempstead Lake State Park. The victim reportedly had a tattoo on her left breast of a heart-shaped peach, leaving her to be dubbed with the moniker Peaches. Even more disturbing, the skeletal remains of a female child aged between 16 and 24 months was discovered in 2011 near Jones Beach State Park. DNA testing has since confirmed that Peaches is the mother of the unidentified baby. And finally, the body of an unidentified young Asian male was discovered in April of 2011 at Gilgo Beach. The victim had been found dressed in women's clothing. He was determined to have been killed by blunt force trauma. As of the date of this recording, no trial date has been set for Rex Heuermann. We know that this was a lot to digest. This is an incredibly complex and dense case, and we did our best to try to give you as much detail and information as we could, yet not overwhelm you with everything that this case involves. But I did have some final thoughts that I wanted to leave you on. Oftentimes we feel that we live in an age where, with the advances in science and technology and surveillance, that there's no possible way that a person can continue to operate like this and continue to commit murders over decades. And it's true, we do live in an age like that. There are more and more ways that we're caught on camera every single day and that we're tracked through our phones and other electronic devices, and our every move seems to be able to be recreated. But there are still people like Rex Heuermann who live amongst us, and that's the scary part about it. This was an intelligent man by people who knew him. This was a person who went to work every single day. This was a person that put on a suit, had a respectable job, commuted with all of us, had a wife and children who went to school. And it's chilling, and it's troubling, and it's nightmare fuel to think about that a person like that can still operate, still use that intelligence to try to commit this kind of carnage and go undetected for as long as he did. But I think the other thing about this case that's worth talking about here towards our closing thoughts is the incredible multifaceted police work that was put into this case. Yes, you had tremendous use of DNA, and yes, you had technology and internet search tracing and phone tracing and cell site reconstruction. But then you also had old-fashioned talking to witnesses and digging through crime reports and looking at car registries. The biggest break in this case, I still believe, came from a cop who just sat down and looked at every car that was registered and matched the description of the suspect car, figuring out who owned those vehicles in that area till they narrowed it down to someone who fit their description. It's about never letting a cold case go forgotten. And that's the remarkable thing about this case, is these were women that many people could have easily forgotten about. And years and decades, in some cases, had passed. But the people involved cared enough to go back and take a look and finally apprehend this monster. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode. As you know, we have a new episode out every single Friday, which covers the topics in true crime legal news for that week. So please check it out on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, we have a brand new membership program I invite you all to check out. It has a lot of benefits that I think are worthwhile. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode in our series on Courtroom Confidential Case Notes.